So we have the recording in progress and just a couple of housekeeping items before we start with our introductions. Similar to other meetings, we do have interpretation services available. So Juliana, Marcela, can you give us a wave? Thank you for being our interpreters this evening. For folks who do prefer to hear the meeting in Spanish, what we'll do is on the right-hand bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see the English and the Spanish interpretation channels. So if at any time you want to switch languages, please feel free to do that. And on your end, Juliana, Marcela, do things sound good? Excellent. All right, so why don't we spend a few minutes just, doing some brief introductions, since this is the first meeting of the year. I hope everybody had a wonderful break. And I know a lot of you folks know each other in the room, but it would be great if we can just share your name and one word for your hope for this coming year. So I usually start on my right-hand side, and Scott, that's you.
Let's see. I'll do the easy part first. I'm Scott Schappenberg. I'm from Roca. Happy to be on the call with everybody tonight. I don't know. I'd have to say not have any travel anxiety related to COVID. Maybe I'll throw that one out. And I'm sure COVID will be the theme here, but it seems like there's this bizarre travel anxiety around COVID, whether you're going to make it anywhere or not. And, so I guess that's what I'll say.
Right. Thank you, Scott. And I do see other folks who've joined. Hi, Myra. Hi, Susana. We have interpretation services at the bottom. If you'd like to switch channels of your Zoom screen, we're doing introductions right now. So Kara, you're up.
I had to put some thought into the hope. Well, let's see. My name's Kara Cogliano. I'm the director of Chelsea Community Connections. I think I start off every year hoping I'm going to survive the years of teenagers in my house.
Teen years, they're tough. Thanks, Kara. Todd?
Todd Taylor, the Chelsea City Council, and Kara, I'm in touch with that emotion. So I've got a freshman at Chelsea High this year, so that's a real challenge. I think for the new year, just recovery is what I would say.
Yeah. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks.
Joan, would you like to do an intro? Something you're looking forward to in the new year?
Hi, my name is Joan Crumble. I'm president of Chelsea Black Community. And yeah, I had to think about this too, but I think for the new year, just getting things done. That's all I can think about, and not be crazy about it. Maybe I should add that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Joan. Thanks. Lourdes, you're up.
I'm Lourdes Alvarez. I work with the city of Chelsea. Something that I would like to do this year is traveling, because I'm missing my family. It's been 4 years without seeing my nephew and my niece. So I hope that this year we can travel.
Yeah. I'm hearing some themes come up: travel, COVID, teen. Thank you, Lourdes.
Crazy.
And for those folks who've joined us, welcome. Thank you so much. We're just doing a quick round of intros, sharing our name and one thing we're looking forward to in this new year. For those who prefer Spanish translation, we do have the Spanish channel at the bottom of your Zoom page. Katie, would you like to go with him?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rakabe. I'm from Senator Markey's office. I'm the regional director for the 7th Congressional District. I'm popping in just to apologize on the senator's behalf. He had votes very last minute at 6:30, and the wraparound time is conflicted with his schedule, so he can't be here today, but he was really looking forward to it. I'm going to be doing some note taking, and if there's anything you guys, anything that pops up that's top of mind, obviously just send my way. It's good to see some familiar faces, and my word is kindness. I just want to see more kindness and be more kind for this year.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Rakev. And yes, we're sad to miss Senator Markey this evening, but we hope in future meetings he'll be able to join us. And we're really happy that you're here, Rakev, to represent and take some questions back to the senator for future conversations.
Thank you.
Thanks. Paul, a quick intro.
How you doing? Paul Nowicki, Director of Operations, Chelsea Housing, and President of the Chelsea Chamber of Commerce. One word is resiliency.
I like that, Paul. Thank you. Rick?
I'm Rick Gordon. I'm a local merchant in the community. And I think one word might be sanity. A return to sanity.
Yeah. Thanks, Rick. Naomi, what about you?
Hi, I'm Naomi. I was a city councilor, am now a school committee member. And I would say snow. I miss snow. So I'm looking forward to snow.
All right, we got some winter
I might be
lovers
alone.
in here. No, we have some winter lovers in here. Scott loves winter too. Thanks, Naomi. Raphael?
I'm Raphael Amaris with the Neighborhood Developers. Erica, thank you for stepping in so last minute. My word is health.
Awesome. Thanks. Myra?
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Mayra
Good
Romero.
evening. My name is Mayra Romero. I'm a resident of Chelsea. My word is health as well.
Muchas gracias, Myra. Gladys, would you like to go?
Sure. Amor. Love.
Amor, love. Thank you, Gladys. Appreciate it. Amanda?
Hi, my name's Amanda. I'm a resident of Chelsea, and my word is family.
Thanks, Amanda. It's a good one. We hadn't heard that one yet. Jenny, would you like to do a quick intro?
Sure. Jenny Camacho from Café El Dorado. And I think many of my words have been repeated: kindness, love, family, health. So yeah, definitely echo those.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Alice?
Hi, I'm Alice Murillo with the Bunker Hill Community College Chelsea campus and a resident of Chelsea and with the TND board, etc. I think my word is connecting. Freedom for connecting.
Yeah.
So get back together again.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alice. Roseanne?
Hey everybody, nice to see you all. My name is Roseanne and I'm with Green Roots and my word is persistence.
Persistence is a good one. Thanks, Roseanne. Peter? All right, Peter, we'll come back to you. Susanna?
Hey guys, my name is Susanna. I'm a Chelsea resident, and my word is peace. Had a lot of excitement these last 2 years, and I'm just looking for a little bit of boredom, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Then we have Carl.
Carl, I work for the city of Chelsea, and my word for 2022 is progress.
Progress. Nice one, Carl. I see a lot of nods. Good word. Alex?
Hi, everyone. Alex Train, Director of Housing and Community Development of the City of Chelsea. And my word is tenacity.
No, nice, Alex. And then we have Natalia, my colleague who is helping take notes today. Natalia, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. It's great to be here. My name is Natalia. I'm a research assistant with HRA. And I think I would echo what Susanna said and say peace. I'm ready for some boring, nothing out of the blue to happen.
Yeah. Thanks, Natalia. Did I miss anybody? Anybody who hasn't gotten a chance to speak yet?
Yes, Peter.
Peter, are you there, Peter? Would you like to do a quick intro?
Yeah, my name is Peter. I'm actually just a student. Tom helped me to join this meeting for my history project.
Awesome.
And one thing I just want to say is like safety. Yeah, I just think,
Awesome.
yeah.
Thanks, Peter. We're happy to have you on the call. And again, folks, my name is Erica Gaitan. I'm the Senior Manager of Community Impact at HRIA, and my hope for 2022 is connectivity, like some of you said. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for doing that. It's always nice to get to know you on a bit more of a personal level before we start talking business. But our agenda for this evening is really we're in meeting 5, the first year of 2022, the first meeting of 2022, excuse me. And today we're really going to be diving deeper into our mental health data. Like in previous meetings, we'll be sharing some data that we've pulled, but we know that that interpretation and that data meaning really comes from all of you. And so we're hoping to use the data as a starting point for discussion to really see what comes up, if there's anything surprising, as we start thinking about the strategies in which we can go about addressing some of these issues. So how does that sound with folks for our agenda tonight? Since Senator Markey isn't able to join today, we may end a little bit early, but if the discussion is rich, then we'll see where it goes and see where the meeting takes us. So I'm going to share my screen now. Before I jump into that, Carl, Lourdes, or Alex, anything that you want to add before we jump into some of the slides? All right, sounds good. Give me a second while I share this. Can folks see this okay? All right, wonderful. So here we are, meeting number 5, and we're going to jump in just really thinking about our mental and behavioral health data. And as you folks have mentioned in previous meetings, we know that there's a lot of limitations. Sometimes data aren't available. Sometimes they're a little bit old in nature when we wish we had more timely data. But this is where we can really have those conversations to say, you know, this is the data available. Where am I seeing the gaps? And really having this as a starting point for discussion as we transition into some of our strategy discussion. It's probably no surprise to you folks that mental health and behavioral health really came up as a key concern for Chelsea residents. When we look at a Chelsea resident survey, the North Suffolk Community Needs Survey in 2019, we saw that behavioral health, which includes mental and substance use, was the 3rd most selected health concern among Chelsea residents. And approximately 41% of residents indicated that mental health was a top concern of theirs. And more than 75% of folks indicated that alcohol and drug use and overdose was a top concern to them. We also know that with our Chelsea Hub, we're dealing with some of these issues on a day-to-day, meeting weekly to discuss really the upcoming needs and emerging needs of our community members, that almost 3/4 or more than 70% of the cases that Chelsea Hub was really looking at closely were about mental health factors. And then we see a little bit more closely that similar proportions of cases involve suicidality, so about 100 cases, more than 12%, or self-harm, also around the 100 case level. And as I'm reviewing these data, I also want to welcome folks to say, you know, if anything surprises them, I'm always happy to stop and take questions. And if not, we can have some of those towards the end of our presentation. But I do want to invite folks to comment as thoughts come to their mind. Now, this slide here is showing us the mental health emergency department visits. And so you'll see here, what I want you to focus on is really this blue line. We'll see that from 2007 to 2014, we see that cases and their trend is really increasing for Chelsea males, but that's also the case for males across Massachusetts, which is this orange line right here. 13% of Chelsea respondents to our survey indicated that they weren't able to access mental health services when they really needed them. So thinking about some of those barriers as we get to our strategy section, we know that some folks are indicated that they wanted mental health services, but they really couldn't access them. And then something that we've heard over and over again in our primary data collection efforts is about youth mental health problems. And so I know in our intros, some of you talked about your teens, and I'm not sure if anecdotally you're hearing this, but what the data are really showing is that almost 1/4, so 1 in every 5 Chelsea middle school students reported seriously considered suicide in 2015. So that data is a little bit older, but we do see that this is a prominent theme. And this graph here really shows us the comparison, where Chelsea is in blue, we have Revere in green, Winthrop, and Massachusetts as a whole. And we see that overall, high school students tend to be reporting seriously considering suicide more than middle schoolers, and it's higher in Chelsea compared to overall Massachusetts and the other communities surrounding Chelsea. And then we had a lot of questions of asking, you know, how has the impact of the pandemic really play into these numbers? So this graph here is showing us respondents who took the Massachusetts Community Impact Survey. And again, these data aren't perfect, so these have to be interpreted with a bit of caution because we see that the numbers are a little bit on the smaller side. But even with those numbers still on the smaller side, we do see some interesting trends here. So on the blue columns, you'll see people who are reporting 15 or more poor mental health days. So that means that more than half of the month, people are really feeling quite sad and saying that they have poor mental health enough to where it's affecting their day-to-day. And this green column on the right-hand side is using the substance users who are reporting an increase of substances since the start of the pandemic. So we see that it's pretty high across the board. And when we look at Chelsea specifically, about 1 in every 3 people who responded to the survey said that they had poor mental health issues at least half of the month. And 40% of respondents said that they've increased their substance use since the start of the pandemic. Any thoughts on that before we move forward? I am curious. Anything stick out to people, jump out, or is this kind of resonating with folks? I'm seeing a lot of nods. Okay. There was a question in our last meeting about special education. We know that students sometimes who have an IEP or who are struggling with mental or behavioral health can also be enrolled in special education. So we did want to pull those numbers to see if there were any interesting trends. And I do want to point your attention to this orange line here in the middle that really shows that from 2016 up until 2021, there has been an increasing trend in students who are enrolled in special education in Chelsea. And then we think about substance use a little bit more. And again, we have data from Chelsea Hub where we're looking at specific cases that folks are talking about on a weekly basis in the community. And of the 812 cases addressed by the Chelsea Hub, we see that more than 35% involved alcohol abuse and almost 40% involved drug use. So that's giving us a little bit more richer data to know that on an ongoing basis, we're seeing substance use really present in the community. We also saw that in 2020, there were 130 opioid-related incidents in Chelsea, including 12 deaths from overdoses, which represents almost a 40% increase from 2019. And then for folks who are curious of who may be getting services right now, these are just some demographic overview of who is seeking services for the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services in Chelsea. Again, this is a little bit older from data from 2017, but in 2017, we saw that the majority of people had never sought mental health treatment before, and more than 1 in 3 had prior mental health treatment at 39%. The majority of folks were over the age of 31. So we see that there are less young people who are seeking substance use health and treatment. And almost half who were seeking mental health services and substance use services in Chelsea identified ethnically as Latino. And then the majority were male.
Can you just clarify for me what BSAS stands for?
Yes, it's the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services, and those are services run from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and they're able to track a little bit more of who's going into treatment, who's leaving treatment, and while these numbers aren't the most up to date, it gives us a sense of who is seeking treatment and who's available to be in these programs to give us kind of a profile of who is in treatment right now. Does that help?
Thanks. Yeah. Yep.
No problem. And then we also wanted to know, what are the primary substances of use in Chelsea? And so this graph is showing us here that continuously from 2010 up until 2017, our latest data, we see that heroin continues to be the primary substance use in the city of Chelsea, followed closely by other opioids. So we don't see those, followed closely by alcohol. So heroin and alcohol are really hand in hand in these two. And we see that trend increasing over the years. And then to bring the numbers to life a little bit more, we did hear from our focus groups, our interviews, how mental health was really playing into the community. And something that we heard over and over again was the experience of trauma, where folks were saying our community is suffering from mental health issues, but trauma are really at the heart of it, particularly as COVID-19 has really made things much more difficult for folks. And it's really a behavioral health concern across the community. And we heard that in some of these quotes that we wanted to uplift from residents, where somebody described mental health disorders as a second pandemic, right? Going hand in hand. We also heard somebody say, we try to address trauma head on, but I think as a community, we could be doing more, bringing people together in different ways to better navigate that trauma that our residents have experienced. And then when we think about particular populations, one person said, a lot of people who come to Chelsea from other countries, there's a lot of undealt with trauma, which can lead to substance use for a lot of folks. So really that trauma of immigrating, the trauma that they may have experienced in their country, and really the burden of that really being seen in issues with folks who are using substances. And then back to this theme where we heard of barriers that were happening with being able to receive mental health services. What we heard over and over again was that long waits and that limited numbers of providers that speak Spanish were the key barriers that folks were seeing when they were trying to access mental health services. One person said, we've had clients tell us that it's limited when it comes to Spanish-speaking therapists, and they end up waiting and end up walking away. So sometimes that wait is so long and those services aren't available that community members will opt out of trying to seek services. And another quote we have is, it's about capacity. We have hundreds of people on waiting lists to see Spanish-speaking therapists, but we just don't have enough people to meet the need. So again, that theme really coming up as mental health services having a barrier to access for some particular residents, especially those who don't speak English. So I'm going to pause there. I know I've been talking at you quite a bit, and I'm really curious to hear from you. You know, I've shown you some numbers, but you folks are really the experts in your community. And so I'm interested in hearing, did this data resonate with you? Is it similar to what you're seeing in the community? And just talk a little bit about how it struck with you as I was going through those. So I'm going to open it up for discussion. And for folks who prefer the chat box, please enter in the chat and I'd be happy to share with the larger group. So first, I want to ask, was there anything surprising or was this pretty, standard? Kara, I see you with your hand raised. Would you like to chime in?
Yeah. I have a lot to say about mental health because I participate on a lot of kind of circles of mental health issues throughout the city. I sit on the mental health trauma team that was created out of the pandemic response team. So we meet twice a month. Right now we were meeting for a period of time like every week. I also sit on the children's cabinet with the public schools, and they have a specific mental health component that we are focusing on with the schools. So I have a lot of voices speaking up about mental health in the city. So I just kind of wanted to share too. I think some of this data is pretty old. It's still relevant, and I think it's still important, but I just wanted to share kind of what I've been hearing in these circles, because I do say that I participate in this as well, and this is a kind of a funnel source of money, but I don't think that's the only thing that's going to solve our mental health issues in the city either.
Right.
So again, some of it is reflective, like, you know, the inability for access, the inability for equitable access for people of all different backgrounds and cultures, the long wait times. MGH has a wait list of over 400 people for individual therapy. North Suffolk goes back and forth. I think the hub cases and that data is really probably the most accurate right now, because that is a weekly meeting happening dealing with crisis situations, and it's very individualized, and yet it's affecting entire families, and then it's infecting entire neighborhoods, and that kind of trickles out into this trauma situation that neighborhoods are dealing with, you know, 5 cop cars on their street at one house, not knowing what's going on that with that neighbor that they maybe care about. So the mental health trauma team has been really looking at kind of creative ways to not only just like, we need more therapists, we need more Spanish speaking therapists. That is a longer, bigger problem than what in this group is trying to resolve, but we're in the schools too. I think we're trying to look at, how do we form more groups? How do we have a healthier mental health component in the city that is supportive of each other? One of the words that came up tonight was kindness. So how do we start infiltrating some of that into the mental health world as well? The schools are completely overwhelmed with students and then not having resources out in the community to refer to. And so the schools are dealing with that in crazy ways too, and doing their best and looking again at kind of group work with kids. But then the kid piece, and I worked in the public schools in Chelsea in the 90s, is that there's a family component that is part of that child's life that might not be getting addressed. And then my other, I'll be quiet in another minute, but my other couple of points is, I think what's missing from this data is sexual abuse and domestic violence statistics in the city. We don't talk about those things, and we need to be, because those are also traumatic things happening to people that we're not talking about, and they're happening. And then I also sit on the DCF board, and I don't think there's any statistics or information from them. And I think that's important. They're an important part of the community in protecting kids and families, and they're working with families and kids and dealing with broken mental health systems as well. So that's kind of my 2 cents on. I don't have a solution for it, and I say to everybody too, you know, this is a process too.
Okay, I really want to appreciate the things that you said and uplift, especially the part that I heard was, as we think about mental health, it's really not that individualistic piece, but how is it trickling down to our families, our communities, and really that collective impact that trauma and mental health issues are having our community. Thanks for that. And then I hear you with some of the gaps in data, and I appreciate you bringing in the DV, sexual abuse, and specific to DCF, and we're going to look into to see if we can pull some of those numbers to really get that richness. So I appreciate you bringing those up. Others, I would love to hear from, you know, what are your thoughts on this data? What does it mean to you? I know there's some youth workers in the group or folks who have kids, and I would just love to hear about how this data struck with you, if there was anything that surprised you or anything that you would like to see moving forward.
This is Alice. I'm still thinking through this, but I know we work so hard with our youth programs. And I'm wondering if we could have some data as to what exists with our youth programs. What supports do they need? How many young people are we reaching? And how can some of these be integrated so that maybe a longer day at school, or maybe their environment could be, protective, supportive, both academically and enrichment activities to also help out. So maybe gathering what is out there and where do we need to continue to support or expand the supports.
Right. It's a really good point, Alice. Knowing, trying to figure out what is our reach in these programming and is it to our expectations? Thanks. I saw Myra, so let's do Myra, and then after Myra, let's do Jenny.
Sí. Buenas, yo estaba.
Good evening. I'm in agreement with what Kara was sharing. These data are old, but I'm also in agreement with what she's saying about mental health. We have to start with the children. For example, in the schools, the children reflect aggressive behaviors or bad behavior. Maybe it's because something is happening at home. Something's not okay at home. So I believe that we need to start paying more attention to the children at a young age, to care for their mental health, because if at home they see, for example, domestic violence, they hear screaming, they learn how to reflect that at school. Sometimes we say, oh, the children are bad behaved, but we don't know what's happening in their households. Maybe this is the way they reflect their issues that are dealing with at home. I think we need to put more attention, especially in the schools. More social workers that can tend for the children when they're having behavioral problems. When a child has been very well behaved, had good grades, and all of a sudden he starts to have bad grades or have bad behavior, maybe something is happening there and they can't express it. They don't have enough trust to be able to share what their problems might be. We should include the education with the mental health in the children, so that when they are teenagers, they don't have to think about hurting themselves or suicide. We have to think about bullying in the youth, because this can take them to depression. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to give individual therapies. I've listened to a lot of youth that they don't have the same trust via a telephone to speak to a therapist via these. I think that we need to pay more attention in mental health, especially in our community, that we're immigrants and we have a lot of trauma from our countries. Sometimes on the way here, the children have been sexual abuse. We need to pay more attention to their mental health, because all this brings that they may be dependent on alcohol or drugs, or contribute to substance abuse. It's like a chain. That was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra. That's really helpful. And I definitely see, and one of the things that we've heard is that a lot of this data is about high schoolers and middle schoolers, but we need to be looking even earlier. And I think that's what, Myra, you were saying in some of your comments, is that it starts when they're really young. Maybe these behavioral issues are coming up as something else, and we need to be able to dig deeper and explore that a little bit more. So thank you, Myra. I really appreciate your comment. Jenny, would you like to chime in, and then we'll do Susana?
Sure. I think Myra took 90% of what I was gonna say. So thank you, Mayra. I'll make it quick. I do believe that it does start, very early on, not just in elementary, but even from the house when you have the kids going into daycare, childcare, those, services that people hire. The other thing that I will say is, it's not just there, it's a continuous work throughout, not just in school, but also with the parents, education, educating the parents, because it doesn't matter if we invest in the school if we're not investing in the parents as well. So we have to educate the parents. We have to get them engaged, get them involved, because a lot of times these parents don't have or haven't had the education to actually be able to lead their kids by example, or actually show them there is a better way. There are other options, and they have to seek other resources like drugs, alcohol, or just listen to a third person, right? In regards to drugs and alcohol and many other substances, right? And then the mental health it's just a domino effect of everything else that goes with it. So I think that the more we invest in not just the schools, but also the education of the parents, having programs that helps the kids, but also the parents, that is a joint effort. I think that will help a lot in the community.
Yeah, really good point, Jenny. And goes back to what Kara was saying earlier, that it's not about one person. It really trickles down into communities, families, neighborhoods. Thank you, Jenny. Susanna, would you like to go? And then we'll do Todd.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to thank everyone that spoke, because I echo everything that has been said up until now. I don't think any of these data are surprising to anyone in this room. I think, if anything, they're undercounting the actual experience of mental health needs and its presence within our community. But I want to focus on a goal of really creating a trauma-informed environment in our community. And I say environment beyond classroom, because I don't think it should stop in the classroom.
Right.
I think that the numbers that we have now, as much as they underrepresent, still support operating under the basic assumption that there is an experience of trauma among our residents, and among more than not. And given that, I want to focus on how do we really create those trauma-informed environments in our schools, in our classrooms, but beyond that, in after-school activities, in youth employment activities, within homes and amongst families and caregivers of all types. How do we better learn as a community to recognize trauma, so that we can better support our residents? I think that's something that we nominally speak to, but I don't think we've put it in practice. I think that there's a real gap there and a dearth, and that it needs to be filled.
Right, absolutely. Thanks, Susanna. Todd, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think probably all of us agree that this is a really kind of underfunded and underrepresented, problem in our community. And, I think it's just about the worst. And I think that the data that you put up on the screen, it's useful to some degree, but I can't remember who said it before, but it's probably woefully underrepresented of what's really going on now. I think mental health issues have gotten worse during the pandemic. I think people suffer, under lockdown and isolation. And, if you're living in a troubled house and you're locked in together for over a year with substance abuse, that is not a mix for good things. Right. So I think that out of all the categories that this committee looks at, all of them I think are important, but this one is really one of the things I think that we're, as a society, we have not adequately addressed. And as far as this committee goes, these ARPA funds are not going to be able to solve this problem. But, you know, we need to think carefully about in what ways we can use this money to mitigate the problems to a degree and get, you know, the most bang for the buck out of funneling these funds to places where they can really make a difference. And I think that probably the lack of, and I agree with all the comments that have been said so far. You know, I think they're, you know, undoubtedly, I think Chelsea probably has, you know, more instances of trauma than most communities in the state. So, you know, this is something that really needs our attention, and I would, you know, I'd like the state legislature and even the Congress, if the senator's person is still here, you know, to take note of that, so we can, you know, maybe get some funding to address some of these things. You know, and I think I think the schools are vital, because the sooner you can solve some of these problems, the better off people are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the problem is bigger than that. And it's why I'm so proud of Chelsea for developing the hub, because this is truly a proactive measure that we need to do more of. I mean, if policies are reactive, you're too late. You know, you're already dealing with a problem. If we can try to be proactive with some of these difficulties that people have, you know, you're solving a multitude of problems downstream. And so I think that's really what we need to concentrate on, and try to really problem solve together with, you know, Kara, I thought you're you know, you're obviously a valuable resource on this. And I think that, you know, we all need to kind of come together and sort this kind of thing out. And there's a lot of good people on this committee. So, you know, I hope we can do that.
Great. Thanks, Todd. I hear the conversation moving towards strategies and solutions already, but before we go there, I want to ask and invite folks who may have not shared, is there anything that this data brought up for you initially, anything that surprised, or you feel like there's gaps that we should look into moving forward?
The only thing that I wish to add is that, todo lo que han dicho está sumamente correcto.
Everything that was said was correct. I would add one part that we have to add more closely, look at more closely, is the cultural aspect with the mental health, the taboo that exists in our community, that the mental health is not there, it's not real, that it's an embarrassment.
The only thing that I would add, I'm like Susana, everything that was said is like to the point. I just wish that we also think about that for many of our countries and many of our residents, mental health is taboo. Mental health is something that we don't talk about it. It doesn't exist. It's an embarrassing. You don't seek it because mental health is for just crazy people que necesitan estar en una institución. So I think
they
that
have to be in an institution.
add to the discussion, to think about the lenses of where some of our community members will see it, and what do we do different about it, in order for us to see the broader impact that we can make if we think strategically about that too.
Right. Gladys, those are such good points, because one thing is that we're seeing is that a one size doesn't fit all, right? Every community has different needs, different taboos and stigmas that they're bringing to the table, and that needs to be considered as we talk about strategies. So thank you for bringing that up. Anybody else want any general comments before we transition to what do we do about it?
Yeah, so following up on the cultural aspect, I also think that this generation, it's still a generation that we need to understand better. It's an internet generation. So there is a lot of the new dynamics and interaction, especially they are struggling a lot because social media. So I think that there is a part of the data that we can quantify, but that quality data that is part of what they are looking for, it's also, we are trying to get there, that information on these one-on-one meetings that we have been having. And something that sometimes it came a couple times, it's that youth is looking for like a one-on-one person that being there all the time to be like very supportive, but 24 hours. So how we set the expectation for mental health, it's also important because we cannot provide like that one-on-one service, even though we want it. So,
right.
And that's something that came a couple times on the youth groups.
Mm-hmm. I see some people nodding their heads. Do you also think that we need to understand Generation Z more? Digital natives? Everything's on TikTok. Yeah.
And we have recently in Chelsea a couple incidents that it occurred on social media, and you will see that the interactions that happened in the past are completely different than what's going on now. And with the pandemic, it's even worse.
Right.
Because they haven't had like a real interaction with people in a while. So now when they return in person, they cannot follow the things that were in place before. And that's what also they are having a hard time at school.
Right.
There are no boundaries, there are no rules. They just don't know how to interact with others in person. And sometimes that's something that it might be not a big deal for us because we are just like grown people that, that are older. It can create a different impact. So I think understanding that it's a part of the way that we can achieve a better succeed on the youth program, especially for mental health.
Absolutely. Thanks for this. And it goes back to Myra's point earlier about, you know, even if we have telehealth options, maybe a young person doesn't want to talk on the phone or doesn't feel like they trust on the phone. And how does that play into things with social interaction? So thank you for bringing that up with this. Jenny, I saw your hand up. Is there anything that you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, I was going to say that it's a completely different language from prior to the pandemic. Whether you are in school, whether you are at work, it doesn't matter, you know, what industry you're in. We are speaking a different language today than we were before the pandemic. Business is done differently, things work differently, and everything else is working differently. So we need to get up to speed with that. And that, you know, impacts everything else, including mental health. I mean, I deal with it every day at work. I deal with it, you know, it's a small cafe, but you still have to deal with the employees having issues with your own kids and then your own kids too. And then are they going to be in or are they going to be out? Is it COVID or is it positive or is it negative? So it's a lot of things that are going on at once, in addition to the changes that created COVID, and then moving into school and seeing all of this at once, going through the schools every day. I mean, it's going to take a while, but we have to learn the language of the new social media, the new way the kids, you know, speak. You know, now they text you a TikTok video and you're like, what? You think I'm that? So it's completely different. Is something that we all need to get up to speed. You know, even if you are social media savvy, you are not, if you're not speaking at the same age level as the kids are communicating today.
Really good points, Jenny. Thank you. Kara?
I just want to add, and I know we don't have a school representative here, and I'm not representing the schools, but I do want to say that the schools have invested in social emotional learning in all public schools, and Chelsea in particular has. So we're also kind of raising generations and future generations that are having a way different understanding of even your feelings and emotions and things that were never discussed in schools as part of a curriculum. I mean, it's a curriculum they're following through middle school and high school, and maybe even in the younger grades. I'm not 100, actually I think yes, in elementary school too. so that we're raising kids to have an awareness of their mental health capacity. It's not foreign to them, and yet they're, again, back to the family piece or who they go home to, it is foreign to them. So there's this not matching up system of, kids who are acting out in school or having a hard time in school, and social workers or, school professionals saying your kid is exhibiting all these things, and yet we haven't caught families up to all this vocabulary and understanding of why this is important. So that's just my 2 cents on the schools are definitely doing 110% of their share of it, and yet it's a catching up piece too.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. Amanda, you have your hand raised. Would you like to share?
So something that I thought of when Jenny was talking about the cultural aspect of dealing with employees and people visiting businesses and thinking about whether or not what's going on in their life is being affected by COVID. It made me think about what the mental health response just specifically with COVID is in the city, like what has been being done for that and what are the limitations for that. Have we really dug deep into that, or what is there information available other than like the general mental health in the past couple of years? Is there something that we could get about statistics just based on like COVID and dealing with it and the trauma and the stigma that kind of comes with COVID, because it's still a very stigmatized virus and you feel isolated if you test positive and things like that, and just interacting with other people just with this new world that we live in that's COVID centric. It feels like sometimes.
Yeah, Amanda, that's such a good point, and we'll definitely keep on looking in to see if what is that COVID response data that we can have access to, because like many of you have mentioned on this call, the data was saying one thing, but we know that it's worse just by our experiences in the community, that things are probably underreported. So how do we go about thinking about that, looking at it more closely in terms of this new world that we're living in? So thanks, Amanda, for bringing that up. Anybody else before we transition to strategies and solutions? Okay, so some of us have already started talking about, some solutions, some strategies as we're thinking about this ARPA money and where it can really make a difference. And I'm wondering if we can just have an initial conversation of strategies that we should be considering and addressing some of the data that's been presented, but also some of those gaps that you folks have been talking about. And that can be things that may be already working that you feel like should be expanded, or things that aren't happening, but are maybe happening in other places that you'd like to see replicated. So I'll open it up. And so, I heard things about social workers, I heard things about trauma-informed care. So I want to invite folks into the space to share a little bit more about their thoughts as we think about strategies and solutions. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. So everything that has been said here tonight, we see firsthand on a daily basis here with our public housing residents, and it's something that we sit there, whether it be myself, the property managers. We have 4 Chelsea police officers that actually live on our site, so we do daily walkthroughs. We have crime watches that we sit and have conversations with the residents about a variety of different issues. And, just when you talk about solutions, I think, and the connection from what goes on in school and the good work that is happening in the schools is having boots on the ground. I'll just speak specifically to our 8 developments, our 1,700 residents approximately. We did try to go for a couple of different grants to try to create a health and wellness portion of our supportive services department here that would basically work with the property managers and the resident police officers in connecting what is going on. There are many times that we'll get complaints of kids, and we'll then set up a meeting with the parents, and the parents will just have no idea, and then the parents will get into what's actually going on in the household, which of course we had no idea.
Right.
We all know the statistics, single parent families and what have you, and of course in public housing, well over 70% of our residents are minorities. Many come from the countries that are war torn and just falling apart, and so they've had no availability of these services or healthcare or anything like that. So and we here at housing, it's we're limited on our funding. We depend so much on our partners. When we look at a few of them are out here with Gladys and Kara and Capic and what have you, that are so helpful to us in trying to connect our residents to services. But it would be nice if there were funds available that we could actually have someone that would be able to work closely with our property managers and our resident police officers who are Chelsea police officers. Because the last thing we want to ever do is to evict families. In fact, the last one we did was in 2019. But that's pre-pandemic, and we were able to usually connect them easily to what they needed to try to resolve their issue. Now it just seems like it is severely magnified because of COVID. Substance abuse is a major issue here on our properties, and trying to deal with the issues that they're trying to deal with. So I think that is one thing that would, I think, benefit us here in public housing. And again, just to throw, over 80, I think it's close to 90% of our residents are extremely low income at that 30 AMI. So they don't have the funds to go out and go to get a private, mental health evaluation. Some of which don't even have health insurance to even, piggyback off of that. So just something to throw out there for a conversation.
Yeah, really helpful, Pon. We know, right, that where we live, work, and play has so much impact on our health and wellness. And so, yeah, the issues that you bring up, that housing is so closely linked to this, all of this is a good one. Amanda, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I was thinking about, I think Kara brought up the SEL curriculum in schools, and I was thinking about maybe if there was a way to push that toward the community, obviously strengthen it in the schools and start young. But if we can translate it to the community and kind of build that up, it could cause a cultural shift within the city, where if we equip people with the proper social emotional learning skills that they need to self-regulate, because they might not necessarily have access in the moment to the resources that they need, like counselors and therapists, that it could drive people away from, oh, I need to go to the bottle, I need to go to a dispensary, things like that. And it will equip them with lifelong skills that they need, not just in the moment to keep them out of trouble, but it'll also change the culture of the city and equip parents and families to be more open to the changes, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point, Amanda. So you're saying the curriculum's already there. How do we expand it? How do we get it into the community, make sure it's culturally relevant? Do you have any ideas of how we might expand that to the larger communities, parents and families, like what avenues we might do that in?
Maybe, obviously, if you want to start with schools, like have school events, but then you'll have to work with the school individually and the counseling, which they're probably already overloaded with a lot of kids who are traumatized just by life, and COVID being added on to that. That's probably something that you don't want to overload them with. But as a city, just having events or pushing, oh, you can do this, these are some ways to self-regulate, they can go a long way. At least I've noticed that with the students that I work with, they're middle school aged. A lot of them have ADHD because I'm in special education, and the power of self-regulation and these executive functioning skills, they go a long way and they'll last a long way.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot, Amanda. Joan, you want to chime in?
Yes, I wanted to try to be a silent participant, but I just had a whole lot of thoughts running through my mind. And the first thing I thought about is how there's different realms of mental health, right? So which and who gets the help usually goes according to the degree of the crisis. So that's just real time at that point. But I feel like if there's a cycle of support for that cycle of mental health. So whether it be familial, what does that look like in the community and how can we address that? And just thinking about just being strategically intentional about installing cycles of support. And the hub looks at real-time crisis, right? But what do you do to build a healthy community? And just thinking about something like trauma circles, right? Which usually uses like an evidence-based technique to help residents cope with stress and burnout and anxiety, which all lead to mental health. Because again, the degree of mental health is different. You have sexual, you have domestic violence, you have trauma coming from another country. It's so wide. What do we do to kind of get to the core and help give strategies, provide strategies and support at a community level? So whether that be organizations, getting some type of support through this grant. And I tell you, the well will run dry really fast if we're just looking at this source of income to help. Because mental health is for centuries, it's been here. It's a part of our life. And it's a part of our life that has been greatly ignored or smothered because of cultural taboos and biases and things like that. And even in the Black community, you're supposed to be strong, nothing affects you, you're stoic. So all of those terms come with who you're dealing with. So I just think that trauma circles embedded in organizations to say, you know what, we're going to give you assistance to focus on the community you work with and help them get through difficult times or whatever is going on in their lives. I think that's important to look at. And I do just want to end with, I always feel like when we talk about cultural taboos and what communities don't want to look at, and whether it's a Black community or brown community, we have to be careful because that helps to take the pressure off of the system, right? Because the system's like, okay, cool. They're not into that. That's a cultural taboo. They don't want that service. So it's important to hold the system somewhat accountable, because we come together in terms of being responsible and getting help and getting what we need here in the community to make it healthier in terms of mental health.
Yeah, thanks, Joan. I love that idea of trauma circles. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Susanna, would you like to add? And then we have a comment from Myra in the chat box. So Susanna, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I've learned over the past couple of years after just personally engaging with mental health care for my family is that there's a real disconnect between the established paradigms that we've been using to treat patients of all ages and what actually resonates and works with those patients. Our medical field has not kept up, neither with the mental health needs, but with the delivery mechanisms that are going to be most efficacious for those patients. And we've seen it. I've seen the same processes being utilized over and over again with the same results or lack thereof. And there has to be a real change in that delivery mechanism if we're actually going to see an improvement in mental health. And one of the ways that I would think of doing it, actually parrots exactly what Joan just said. It's training multiple people within a particular environment to really provide a safe space where residents, students can create trusting, caring, and responsive relationships. I think it was Jenny that talked about the youth needing that one-to-one, and there simply not being enough providers to allow that opportunity.
Right.
But I think if we start training more people whose specific responsibilities really include providing access to those safe spaces, I think we're going to see a general improvement in the mental health of our residents across the community.
Thank you, Susanna. Point well taken. Well said. Thank you. We have in the chat box, Marcela or Juliana, are you able to translate that for the group?
Yes, in the chat box, Mayra says that she feels like more workshops to train the parents to specialize in mental health so that parents can understand the behaviors and can start speaking about mental health and not refer to it as being crazy. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I hear. Jenny, if you are, go ahead.
I believe I have to switch to, you have to switch to one language. So in this case, I think you have to switch to English in order to hear it.
Okay, that's fine. I just read it. That's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Let us know if you have other questions. Okay, sorry about that. Go ahead.
It's okay. So more workshops to train the parents to help with the stigmas or the bias or prejudice around mental health, to not refer to it as being crazy or other things. And also to help the immigrant families that are coming with this trauma or the domestic violence, alcoholism, sexual abuse, and other problems that they have. They bring with them and kind of transfer it to their children's mental health.
Thanks, Juliana.
You're welcome.
These are all great ideas, and I want to hear, Paul, is your hand raised again, or is that just from your last comment? Got it. For folks who are in the community on the ground, you know, you've seen things work, maybe not work, maybe you've seen things in other cities that you'd love to see in Chelsea. Now's the time to share some of those strategies that you're thinking about.
I'll add, I think that, again, we have Hub as an example, and it is working in a lot of ways, but then there's still a lot of loopholes. As many people come to that table, there's still some disconnect. And this is really just off the top of my head, but I keep thinking about this case management component that I feel like some of the whole city kind of lacks. We tell people to go to this agency for this, or go over here for this support. And yet we're so rich with resources, but navigating a lot of that when you're new to this country, new to systems that are helpful or may not be helpful, and having kind of either, you know, having some family case management. Again, we often identify this one person that has all these problems, but yet we don't manage the whole component of everybody that's impacted by that. And again, I keep going back to this trickle effect, but I think that the city often lacks this case management component. We have street navigators, we have substance use navigators, we have homeless navigators out on the streets, but how much, and then things get cut off, like, okay, we can help you for 8 weeks and then we're done. And then that's not enough for what is going on, or why things get cut off for various reasons. So I look at case management as an important piece that is missing in the city. And then my other thing that the mental health trauma team has been working really hard on, and I've been a little bit in the side wings on this, is the state through DCF about 6 years ago, formed 14 family resource centers across the state based on county. Those counties, Chelsea falls in Suffolk County, and so Suffolk County's Family Resource Center landed in Roslindale, which was not at all helpful to families or people in Chelsea. It has since expanded to a small family resource center is in Everett. And they do tremendous work for families in Chelsea, but it's not Chelsea. And we know that we're different and that we could benefit from similar funding, modality, programming, support, and the investment in it. And the mental health trauma team has approached the people, kind of some bigwigs within the state, to say, why does Chelsea keep getting passed over for a family resource center? Because that would be some of this solution as an investment in, and some of what we've talked about too is prevention. Prevention work. That's what Chelsea Community Connections is. We're supposed to be preventing families from getting involved in DCF. That's our mission. So that prevention money is so teeny tiny because it's hard to show that it works, or does it work? How do you say how many families did we prevent from getting involved with DCF this year? Impossible. So is there an investment in prevention in mental health in Chelsea? It's something to think about.
Great points, Kara. And I love how you shared that, the services may be there, but if people don't know how to navigate them, people don't know how to really see how they work together, those services, then it's not going to be effective. So thanks for bringing that up. Rafael, you want to go next?
Yeah, I just want to say, I always think about what the task is of what we're supposed to do at the end, and I'm a little nervous about it. There is a significant amount of money, but it's also a limited amount of money. And, we've gone through, I think, 5 of these sessions now, and we have discussed many issues that Chelsea, even with this additional money, obviously won't be able to all address sufficiently. And today that's been sort of a repeated statement that everybody has made. So I'm a little worried about how we're going to get to that place where we can evaluate solutions, not just based on what we'd like to see, but what actually is possible or works on the scale that we might be able to do. So that makes me nervous. And so I'm wondering, I don't know, if anybody here from the city can tell us where we're going next, but I'd love to hear, like at some point, a list of ideas, some of the ones we raised as a group tonight, but other ideas that may be possible, and some evaluation of what's possible and what isn't. And I just want to throw out one that I think we haven't discussed yet tonight is peer-to-peer support that I think can be really helpful. I don't know how strong that is in our communities. I think there's definitely a need for it, and there could be, in theory at least, the possibility for investing in that.
Rafael, can you tell me more when you say peer-to-peer support? Just expand on that a little bit, what that would look like, who would be involved?
I'm no expert, but what I'm saying is we've talked a lot about there's a need for, there's a lack of therapists. There's a lack of Spanish-speaking therapists. And we talked a lot about how people of different ages are affected, but we spend a good amount of time talking about youth. And I'm thinking that sometimes it could be really helpful to be able to hear from someone who's been on the same journey, but has maybe been through it a little further and has learned in different ways, has been able to access resources or so on, and be able to provide that help as part of a structured, not necessarily just informal environment, but as part of a structured environment supported by mental health professionals to provide that kind of help to others. And my hope would be that would be really effective. And my hope would be that it may be possible to make it more widely available, and it may be in theory at least, and that it may be possible to empower the community to be stronger in taking care of itself and not having to wait in line for a professional to be able to do that. So I don't know much more about that, but those are my theories. I don't know if they can actually become real on that.
Yeah, that was really helpful, Rafael. Go ahead, Alice.
I love the idea of the structured approach, structure that comes with training and supports. It's also an opportunity for employment for those who are participating, the youth, they're doing the peer tutoring, a job that's connected to something, tied to the school and tied to their peers. It'd be a wonderful way to keep the income in town and support families as well.
Right. Thanks, Alice. I want to turn that question to Carl. Alex, over there, see if you have any comments on Rafael's question about where we go next and how do we know what's possible based on these ideas and strategies that we're generating.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last handful of meetings have each dealt with different topical areas or subject matter areas. So this will be the last meeting that we're dealing with a specific subject tonight. It's mental and behavioral health. So as we've been going through each of these meetings and listening to the ideas, suggestions, and strategies that you're sharing, we've been rigorously taking notes. So the next set of meetings that the group will participate in, we'll be reviewing those ideas and strategies. We'll start talking through how we can narrow them down and prioritize them, as well as other funding sources that might be available to make some of those, bring some of those to fruition without relying on these local dollars. So I think that conversation will occur over the course of the next 2 meetings and allow the group to kind of settle on a set of strategies and priorities where this limited bucket of local money could be catalytic. I think, again, we see this as more of startup capital, where this won't be a sustainable long-term revenue source, but it will be funding that can be a springboard for certain ideas, getting them off the ground or trying out different pilots that might be efficacious and don't have existing funding. So we'll be revisiting all of the ideas that were shared in each of these groups at the upcoming meeting. So we'll do a refresher and then we'll start a discussion around prioritizing them and teasing out kind of what the ultimate strategies and priorities of the group are as we start developing the plan.
Thanks a lot, Alex. That's really helpful. Carl, Lourdes, anything you want to add up on that? Okay. So it sounds like right now the idea generation is where we're aiming for, the brainstorming, like if anything in the world was possible. And then the following 2 meetings is really where we start putting pen to paper and start prioritizing as a group to say, where can we have action? Where can we start investing some of these funds in a way that's manageable and really is going to set us up for success moving forward? So thanks for the question, Rafael, and thanks for the clarification, Alex. For folks who we haven't heard from, I want to invite you into this space as we're really developing these strategies and ideas. What are things that you want to see that you wish, that would really tackle mental health, substance use, not just with young people, to Rafael's point, but as we think across the spectrum of residents in Chelsea, whether they're folks who are new to the country, older adults who we really haven't talked about much today. I'm really just thinking about those ideas that we can generate as we begin to prioritize in our next session. Earlier on, I heard about trauma-informed care, and Susana, I think that comment was from you, and I'm wondering if you would be open to sharing with the group, maybe in areas where you've seen that work, or just expand on that thought a little bit more. If that were to be reality, what could that look like in the city of Chelsea?
Oh, Eric, I wish I had a ready answer for that wonderful question. Unfortunately, I don't. So trauma-informed care is a long-standing conversation that has happened in a number of groups that I'm involved with, particularly those that focus on educational advocacy in underserved student populations. But figuring out how to uniformly manage access to a trauma-informed environment has been very difficult at best. And this is where my suggestion was start small, start with truly training folks to be trauma-informed and be able to provide that high standard level of care in specific environments across our communities, and not just in the schools, although the schools certainly always benefit from this kind of care. But even working with employers, working with our housing, working with our healthcare, it's not quite as prominently available as we'd like it to be. And so I would be more than willing to start small, but really just would love to hear anyone else's experiences and ideas and how we just get it out there.
Yeah, thanks, Susanna. Paul, would you like to share?
Yeah, so, you know, we've been fortunate here on just a few different things. On our elderly side, dealing with elderly disabled, where we have 416 units of elderly. And so over the years, we developed a pretty comprehensive supportive services program that really ties in when we have issues like this with the senior center and our senior advocate out of the senior center, as well as with Mystic Valley Elder Services, who we have fortunately housed at one of our state elderly disabled buildings. And we hear about this, how do a lot of our residents do not know how to navigate. But when we have that conversation, because when we do the annual inspection and they fail their inspection, then we have a conversation with them, they'll talk about a variety of different things. And then we make that referral immediately. And then there's a response immediately. You know, on our family sides, where we have been successful recently is only because of the fact that I had a connection with Mass General Hospital and a couple of the clinicians over the last 25, 30 years that happen to still be there, and reaching out to them and dealing with a couple of the families that really their behavior was very troublesome. And just because of that connection. So that goes back to what we were saying earlier. I would love to see, you know, more boots on the ground. How do we see Hub, you know, is successful? And I've been on quite a few door knocks with Hub. It's because Hub brings it to the door and they have that conversation face to face. Okay. And that's how we have been successful here at Chelsea Housing, is that we have been able to, whether it be myself or the property manager or the resident police officer, we make that initial connection and then we have that conversation. And then because of our partnerships, but being able to have more access to clinicians on a more continued basis, you know, to make those referrals and to have them on site. Also to have that connectability where they would have the access to, okay, I'm dealing with Paul Nowicki and his children. Yes, they go to Chelsea High School. So let me reach out to the clinician at Chelsea. Let's see what's going on there. Because as I mentioned earlier, there's quite a few parents here that weren't aware of some of the, I'll give you an example. One of our family sites is that a few of these kids were hanging in where the mail is dropped off, and they were very aggressive and towards the mail carrier. And this particular family was like, geez, I haven't received mail. We reviewed the tapes. We find out it was that family's children that was actually doing the threatening behavior. And then we sat down, had the conversation, brought in, you know, actually we did include Dan Cortez and got North Suffolk Mental Health involved. So is that kind of accessibility, I think, having the funds available to have that accessibility for, you know, for our families and for our elders, you know, because I don't know if they're going to go to sit in that line like was discussed. Right. You know, we found out here in housing that bringing it to them, you know, increases the participation, no matter what it is.
Right.
So,
yeah, great points, Paul. Thank you. And with this, I want to open it up to you. We've heard a lot of comments about some downstream, some upstream approaches, and I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about different layers as we think about strategizing.
So yeah, so I think that not only for mental health, for all the topics that we have been discussing during the last 5 meetings, there is not a unique solution that apply for everyone.
Right.
So I think the key is identify all those layers across the issues and strategize specifically for the groups that we identify they needed the most. So as an example, mental health, we talk about women's, we talk about youth, we talk about workers. So how we connect and engage with those different groups, it's part of the challenge, because for some, it's really hard to think on mental health when you have like 3 jobs. You don't even have the time to think on that. So we cannot think that the same that apply for youth will work for the whole family. So those are, again, the things that also apply for all the issues that we have been discussing. It's something that I will encourage everyone to think for now on. When you strategize on funding, part of this, it's critical to recognize what each group also needs.
Great point, Lourdes. And with that, we've talked a lot about young people. We've talked a bit about family and those connection issues. And Kara, something you brought up in the chat is that older adults and their mental health is another topic that we're missing. So I want to invite the group to think about strategies or ideas as we think about older adults and maybe the specific issues they may have. If folks have ideas that they want to bring forth of strategies we may be able to fund through this process. Another piece was the cultural aspect. Maybe folks who are newer to the country or don't speak English as a first language. Are there any strategies that folks really want to bring up in this conversation of ways that we can specifically focus on those populations who may be newer? Okay, if any ideas come up, please add them in the chat. And then a bit that we also talked about was families, maybe single family headed households, maybe parents who are working multiple jobs. As we think about these strategies, are there any that come specifically to mind as we think about either women, single headed households, or families?
For me, it goes back to creating safe haven for the children that the parents are working so many hours. Do they have a place to go to where they can connect with other youth, where there's some supervision, some supports, academic or enrichment? Because these parents are, working 3 jobs, they're not home. So creating a forum, a space for these young people to participate and join with others in a safe environment.
Right. Thanks, Alice. All right. So we've generated a lot of fantastic strategies and ideas as we think about prioritizing in our upcoming meetings. I want to invite folks who haven't said anything, any final strategies, any ideas that they want to bring to the table before we take a break. All right. So it's break time, y'all. Carl?
Oh, so as you're thinking about these, I just want to remind people that while we may think of 15 million as a lot of money, it's a one-time pot of money. And that, if the strategies are things like better service delivery, those services won't have a funding stream after the money is gone, which will be in only a couple of years. So as you think about it, we as the city will be looking for other streams of money to provide services over the longer time. But what we have here is an opportunity to invest in something that will structurally change things in a way that we could potentially deliver better services or reach populations who can't be reached currently.
Great point, Carl. As Carl set that stage, did anything else come up for folks? knowing this money isn't forever, but it's a starting point. Rick, were you going to chime in and say something? We can't hear you. Can you hear us okay, Rick? Oh, it looks like we lost you, Rick, for audio. If you're able to chat in the chat box, that would be great. If not, we'll come back.
I just want to, I do appreciate, Carl, what you're saying too about it, you know, keeping the perspective that this is kind of seed money, but I also look at it, even, you know, $100,000 to something in various pockets of all these topics that we have to talk about is a start to say we have to build on that. Like that eventually you can't, it's very hard. And I've spent 9 years in this job, like prior to the pandemic, trying to get $3,000 grant for field trips. And that was like pulling teeth. Nobody would want to give any money. Now that we have all this proof and data and numbers and things that we've been doing over time, we're getting money in different streams of places, which has been amazing. But it's hard to start that unless there's an investment in that seed money. So I appreciate the perspective of us thinking about it in that way, because you got to start somewhere, but then you got to put the energy in making sure you have the data, making sure you have accurate numbers and things to prove that the work is happening or that there is a need here. And so even this committee to me is a start of these conversations of like, it needs to continue on after maybe we still need to get together once or twice a year to say, did the investment in whatever we made some of these decisions on, is it paying off? And should we continue to invest in it? And how do we? Because I think collectively, again, I find this city to be amazingly rich in so many ways, and yet we have to pool our resources together to make it continue on.
Great point, Kara. Jenny?
Kara, you're absolutely right. Yes, it's not, you know, it's just some money, and like Carl was saying, this is coming in now for a few years. But if we think of it, we have to think of it as let's invest in what we definitely don't have, desperately need, that can give us an option for future community investment where others are going to see, yes, they needed that. We can see the difference because of that. And I think that's what's going to set it apart and to will it continue or not, right? Because again, we are making decisions based on data that is not 100% accurate, the best that we can have at hand. And we are thinking about what people are facing today and what we in the community are facing, whether we are residents, business owners, or officials within the community. So I think that any change that we make to change the community to better is a great investment, even if it's short term.
Thanks, Jenny, for that thought. Any other reactions from folks? Thanks, Roseanne. Okay, Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things I think that we've left out, and oftentimes I think it does get left out, is that, you know, I think that we need to also reach out to the private sector on some of this stuff. You know, we all kind of look to the public sector for you know, for money for programs and everything else, but I think that employers have a vested interest in good mental health for their employees, and are also, I mean, one of the problems that I think, you know, we're going to have is, you know, it's all well and good that this is, you know, quote, seed money, but are we going to really reinvent the wheel about some of this stuff? or are we going to use things that are already in place, or are we going to try to model something after the hub or something like that? But I think that this is such a comprehensive problem, and it really touches kind of all aspects of society, no matter where you stand. I think that we really need to try to bring in elements of the private sector into this conversation to try to address this a lot more comprehensively. And employers can certainly see if there's a problem at work, just like people in the schools can sometimes see what's going on at school. So I mean, it's really such a complex problem. I mean, we're really not going to solve. I think Raphael had a good point in that we're talking about all these big issues, but we really have to kind of narrow it down to what this particular subject, how we're going to address it with limited funds, and try to get the most effective solution to address some of these problems. Of course, we're not going to be able to do everything, but how can we be most effective in doing that? So
right.
I just think that it has to be something that's proactive, and something that we spend money on a central thing, a central mechanism that kind of spokes out and can engage other either private or public entities to come and bring funds and help and personnel and training and all that kind of thing together. So this is a lot more complicated subject matter than the things I think we've addressed in previous meetings, but it's also, I think, one of the most important too. So it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, great point, Todd. It's not one sector doing the work, it has to be expansive. And Rick, I want to uplift your question about an email and changes to the program, and to the folks in Chelsea, Carl, love this, Alex. Would you want to respond to Rick's question?
So in terms of the schedule of ARPA meetings?
So Rick, the email that went out this morning mentioned some disturbing changes. Are there any changes to the program?
I think you might be meaning the ARPA, that document that you sent out today that had the ARPA changes in it. I started to read it, and then it was 485 pages. So
just a light read.
The overview was 43.
I got it. the ARPA final rule.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. I don't think so, but that's a good question for Tom.
Yeah, there's nothing in there that would impact this committee. If anything, the final rule changes gave communities a little more flexibility to spend money in the areas where you're looking to spend money. So I don't think, if anything, the rule changes created more flexibility between the interim rule and the final rule.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom, for that clarification, and Rick for the question. Any other comments that folks want to uplift? Okay, in our last couple of minutes, I did just, instead of giving you all a break, I just want to tell you what is in the last half of the PowerPoint so you can look and digest it on your own time. But I did want to give you just a quick foundational, just what's in there so that you can take a look at a time after this meeting. We just wanted to close the circle because a lot of questions have been brought up. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. A lot of questions have been brought up about the data that have been presented. And so what we've done in the second part of the slideshow is we've gone through each of the meetings and the questions that came up. For example, in meeting 2, somebody asked, where did the small business data come from and how many small businesses are there in Chelsea? In these slides, we've put our responses to those questions. So for example, we had about 736 small businesses that were analyzed by UMass Donahue Institute. And we do that at the end of this slideshow for each of the questions that were posed. Is there more information on additional rounds of PPP funding and disbursement? And unfortunately, we don't have that data yet, but we just wanted to be transparent about what is and what is not available, because as many of you have mentioned, there are a lot of gaps in this data, but we want to be sure to do our due diligence when these questions come up. And so I do want to encourage folks to look at this, to look at meeting 2. There was also questions related to the impact of inflation in the supply chain. And in these slides, we've also had data sources where folks can do a little bit more digging, but where we've had some engagement and to try to fill some of those gaps with the data that we could find. As an example, inflation did increase over 5.3% in the greater Boston region. And we know that those prices are increasing for things like grocery prices, which went up just 6% in November alone. So point taken to the folks who told us that inflation is huge and it needs to be reflected in these data that were presented. And then similarly with meeting 3, when we talked about housing and food security, one of the questions asked was, are there additional data on housing quality? And the city was able to share with us that 54% of properties in Chelsea have a housing code violation of some sort. And of this percent, 85 are really classified as higher risk. Just a couple of other slides that I'm going to move across, but this is how the end of the slideshow is really included, where we talk about capturing all evictions. And one of the questions asked were, are we capturing all eviction data? And we know that evictions through the court only cover a really small portion of what we're seeing due to subleasing and other practices that we've heard about in community meetings. And a lot of that information is sensitive as we're talking about collecting things like immigration status. So this is where we see a huge gap in the data related to evictions in the city of Chelsea. And then a question was asked about recent estimates on homeless students. And the school district was able to share with us that they've actually seen a decrease in the numbers between 2017 and 2018 from about 463 students to 265 students in the 2021 school year. Although we do know that these numbers are also underreported, and so there may be some gaps in the data there.
Can I just make a clarification on that?
Absolutely.
So I just want to make sure people understand that for purposes of reporting by a school department, a homeless student doesn't mean someone sleeping in the elements. As far as we know, we don't have any students sleeping in the elements. A homeless student for this purpose means their family could potentially be couch surfing, or much more likely they're in some sort of shelter facility, hotel facility being paid for by the state. And so they're considered homeless. They're being transported to Chelsea Public School System because this is their sort of school system of origin. And so they're counted as a homeless student, but they're not sleeping in the elements.
That's really helpful, Tom. I appreciate that clarification. Any other thoughts on data that, we've now presented the mental health and substance use data. Is there anything else that folks want us to follow up on as we start closing the gaps and some of these issues that we've talked about? All right. And any final strategies that's burning on someone's mind that they didn't get a chance to talk about earlier related to mental health and substance use? Go ahead, Elizabeth.
No, it's a comment that we extended the ARPA survey until the end of the month to give residents the opportunity to, we're still collecting we are going to the food pantries to take the survey. So we start working with field workers, taking application for folks that has no internet access. So that's one of the reasons we decided to extend the survey until the end of the month. And all the presentation, the notes for the meetings, remember, are in the Dropbox. We also have the shared document that you can write your thoughts, ideas. Everyone has access to that. If someone had any issue accessing either the Dropbox or the shared drive, let me know.
Thank you, Lola. That's really helpful. Please spread the news about the survey. We want as many voices represented as possible. Thank you all.
Yeah, at the moment we have just under 350 responses to the survey. So we'd like to get past 500.
That's a good goal, Carl. So we can do it. This committee, if anyone can do it, let's spread the word. Anyone we see, make sure that their voice is represented. Lourdes, anything else?
No, and again, if your organizations, we can send the field workers to fill out surveys at your places. So let me know if there is any specific time frame this week or next week, and I can make the schedule for them.
Thank you for that. Jenny, were you going to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to suggest if you have the surveys printed, I'll be happy to have a stock and you can have somebody drop off and then pick up and we'll have a box for them to drop off. If you want to do that, Lourdes, we can have it at the cafe. We can put it in there and people can just drop off right there. Do like a drop off box. We'll have it by the register and people can just drop them off there.
Great. So I'll stop by tomorrow.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Laura, if you also drop some off to my store, and I'll be happy to put up a sign or hand some out.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Great crowd surfing going on. Crowd sourcing. It's a late night, y'all. Well, I want to thank you all so much. Alice, any final thoughts that you were going to mention?
No, nothing from our end. I want to thank everyone for attending this evening. Again, please promote the survey. And, we did share, one thing, we did share the final American Rescue Plan Act rule that came out from the US Treasury, as well as a synopsis of it. It's a lengthy document. The summary does do a relatively good job at concisely identifying eligible uses of funds, what populations are eligible to participate in programs that are funded by ARPA, and some of the kind of technicalities. Encourage everyone to kind of take a look through that and let us know if you have any questions. But that's about it. I thank everyone for joining tonight.
Thanks,
Thank
Alice.
you, Erica.
Yes, thank you all for having me. It's such a rich conversation, fantastic ideas. Please be in touch if anything comes up that you weren't able to share at this meeting. And I hope all of you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night,
Good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.